Hello. My name is Tim Clapham. Thank you for coming on. From Lux. We're in Sydney. We're like a small motion graphics studio. It's the website. We have Hello Lux, which is a training company we run. We have hundreds of free tutorials for cinema. So if anyone's interested. We also do paid training. Learn cinema 4D in one day. It is possible. Learn rigging. I'm just going to be a big advert for my company. HelloLux.com, check it out. So I'm going to talk about a job we did earlier this year for Vivid, which is a festival of light, music, and color in Sydney. They do it every year. It's amazing. They kind of transform the whole city into like brilliant color installations, projections, and probably the most prestigious job is the lighting of the sails, which is when they project onto the Sydney Opera House. That's the Sydney Opera House, just in case no one knows. It's a pretty amazing building. It's an amazing canvas, but it's a bit unusual because of the shape. So it has its challenges. We had to create about, well, it's 15 minutes long, the projection. It's about 5K. And we did it in 7 weeks. Pretty much 2 of us with a couple of other guys helping out on a couple of shots. And we did about 9 minutes. Now, the guy that I work with, Mike Tossetto from Never Sit Still, he just sent me this process reel yesterday, so I thought I'd drop it in. So, yeah, huge thanks to Mike for cutting that. Thank you. The director for this is a guy called Ash Bolland, and that's his site, so you can see his work. I've worked with Ash quite a few times over the years. He's like got an amazing vision. He sees the most incredible things in nature that is right in front of our eyes every day, and we just kind of don't notice them, and he kind of brings them alive and makes weird and wonderful things out of them. So the idea behind this project was that he wanted to transform the Opera House into a whole bunch of audio creatures. Rather than look at it with the idea of projecting onto the Opera House as a surface for projection, he wanted to transform the Opera House, almost like a metaphor for the content inside. So it's a pretty cool project to be involved with. These are some photos of the event, just to kind of give you an idea of the sheer scale of the building and how many people attend. You can see it's pretty massive. Loads of tiny little people. And not the best vantage point. They project right across the harbour. I think they use 16 projectors. 6 alone just for the main central sail. So it's a bit daunting as well. It's the most widely viewed projection in the world. It's pretty cool to be involved with it. These are the credits of the people. You can visit lux.tv if you want to read that. But most notably, I want to talk about Never Sit Still, because they're a studio that share a space with us in Sydney. And Lux and Never Sit Still joined together to collaborate on this project. Mike Tossetto, Alex Barnett, and I also had another guy working with me called Dan Bragger. Mike and myself really did most of the 3D. So it was a big undertaking, 9 minutes at 5K, and we had about 7 weeks to turn it around. You can see the work that they do here, so please have a visit. As you can see from that process reel, there's loads and loads of shots that we worked on and lots of very complicated organic things. So I just wanted to go through a few different shots and break down how we did it. These are some of the original style frames that Ash sent us, and you can see that he's just jamming out in Photoshop, painting this over the top of a photograph. And these are like chrysalises that form over the top of one of the creatures. The chrysalises tear open, and then it reveals these butterfly wings that sort of unfurl onto the sails. These parasites then grow across the butterfly wing, kind of destroying it. This is the second concept for the parasites. They were more parasitic. Now they're kind of more blobby things. And then these huge shells kind of pull themselves over with muscles. The shells then crack open and reveal like this octopus inside. This is another style frame of some other parasitic things. But I put this in because it's nice, Ash giving us these references of how maybe the materials should feel and look. But you can see that his style is really loose. And from a 3D artist perspective, some of this does leave quite a lot up to the imagination. But that's cool, you know, it's almost like a semi-open brief, and he was a really great director to work with, and as long as it looked good, and he was happy with it. This is another shot, this one we call Jellyfish. Not that they're really very jellyfish-like, but again, like a creature that he's color corrected in Photoshop, just to give us an idea of the sort of materials. And I just dropped this one in because this is the actual shot in its finished state on the Opera House. And it's interesting to have a comparison of like the original sketch. And also with this shot, this was like a truly global collaboration because there were a few other guys working on some of the other shots. And we had Rich Nosworthy in New Zealand. So I started working on this, and then Rich in New Zealand took over. He did some of the modeling and a bit of the sim. And then we went and sent it to someone in Slovenia who twisted poly. And then he did the animation. And then he sent it back to me in Sydney, and I did the textures and the rendering. I got the rendering side of it, yeah. But that one was one of the really successful shots because it really felt like the Opera House was sort of transparent. You could see through it. I'm going to start off with the chrysalis. We're going to talk about that. So there's the original sketch. This is what it looked like on the Opera House. It's a bit blown out on this photograph, but like you can't really be projecting things that are this grey and dull. They need to be like really heavy-handed with the grade and push the saturation. So the first thing we're going to look at, and I'm going to jump out of here, is how we form the chrysalis. So this is the basic scene that we work with. You can see that we've got some geometry for the Opera House. There you go. This is just based off a proper scale model, and it's got the hero camera position. The nice thing with projection work is that the camera doesn't move. So you can fix it in post quite a lot if you need to. But the difficulty with this, of course, is the shape. Like, you can't have anything coming outside of this area because that's the sky. So you have to contain it within there. So for the forming the chrysalis, we basically started off with this chrysalis model. Let's just hide this. And if we just Boolean this out, what I wanted to do was just make the front part. So I just did a quick ball on that. Make that editable, and we can delete that inside part. So now we've got this geometry, which is essentially just going to cover the front of the shot before. It's just a transition device, really. And we used X particles for this. And what I wanted to do was to kind of grow kind of fibers over it, almost like as if it was being woven across. And it's something that's just like an absolute doddle in X particles. So what I did first of all was just came into this mesh and I wanted to grab all these edges. So I'm just going to do a loop select around here. And then you can take this and do an edge to spline. I'm not actually sure why I did it this way. You could probably just use the edge selection, but I did it with a spline. So I've got an emitter here, and I've sort of set these up already. Otherwise, I only fumble about. But if we get this spline and we drag this in here and press play, we should see some particles if we switch it on. And there we go. So the next thing I wanted to do was have those kind of moving over the surface. And lo and behold, X Particles has this thing called follow surface. If we enable this, grab our geometry, drop that into the objects, and now you can see we've got all these particles swarming over the surface. So to create the actual fibers, we just really need to trace those particle paths. I've got a trail object here. If we enable that, let's just hide this. And you can see now we're starting to get these trails traveling across. So for rendering this, I mean, it's just generating splines. There's a load of ways you can render the splines. You could create geometry. You could use the X Particles material itself, but we chose to use hair for this. Starting to feel quite nice. Got a little bit of hue adjustment in the hair material. It's not feeling organic enough, really. I wanted the surface to be a bit thicker as well. So one of the things we can do is, in the follow surface, we can give it some offset. So if I offset this by 0.25 with 0.25 variation, it's going to push the particles away from the surface, and they're all going to be somewhere between that area. And it gives all the fibers a bit more of a gap. You get some soft shadows between. It just feels a little bit nicer. The other thing that I wanted to do was just have it so that instead of these regular straight lines, they sort of broke up and branched out. So for the branching, we use the branch modifier. And that's actually a cool modifier. It allows you to, it basically spawns the particle. So you get one particle comes out, splits it off, then they split off. If you use it with the trail object, you can create tree structures, or like someone's lungs, or a chrysalis forming. The branch object, it gives you the opportunity how long you want your branches, how often it should branch, the angles, and then you add these sub-branch objects, and each time you add one of those, it's going to create another set of branches. So you can add a lot of those and quickly bring your computer to its knees, but it creates a really nice result. If we just rewind and press play, you can see what happens, and if we hide the actual particles as well, you can see we get this really nice organic growth pattern happening. And because it's coming from the edge, it's just slowly just going to enclose the chrysalis. And we end up with this kind of result. And you can see it's lovely because it follows the contours of the topology. So you can see the shape of the chrysalis. You get the nice speck on there. And that's how we did it. So basically what we ended up with was this, like you just saw. The actual chrysalis itself, which is done using like subsurface scattering, a whole bunch of noise shaders. And if we then create a matte, which we did, we just projected a gradient onto the chrysalis itself with some turbulent noise. Boom, boom, boom. Use that matte with that, and you get this. It's already starting to feel quite nice. So as it grows, you feel the chrysalis form over the top, and then we're really pushing the saturation in the grade as it forms, and we end up with this glowing kind of chrysalis. And we're doing that for each of the sails of the opera house. Next thing that happens is that chrysalis starts to tear open, and then there's a butterfly that reveals inside. And it looks like this. And the thing with like the projections, it's a massive screen, you know, it's a massive surface. When you're watching a little computer monitor, it's totally different to working with a 60-foot high or 100-meter high building. Like if you're on the top of a skyscraper and you drop a football, it takes quite a long time before it hits the ground. When you're looking at a little screen this big and you do that, it's like so slow. But if you animate it at the speed that feels right on a screen, it's just too fast on the building. So all your animation skills, you have to go and slow down. So everything on this feels, when you watch it out of context, it feels kind of slow, but the pace is right when you're in a huge public environment. So the next thing was tearing the chrysalis. Here are some tests that we did to start with. So first of all, we were thinking what we do is we do it with cloth. Now, Cinema 4D cloth gives you the option to tear. Depending on how far it pulls the points apart, at a certain distance, threshold, they'll snap, and the cloth will tear apart. And the cool thing is you can actually use vertex maps. You can paint a vertex map where you want it to actually tear. And you feel some of them are feeling a bit teary, some are a bit erody. None of them were the right thing. And one of the big problems here is that you can see all the pieces are going everywhere. If you think of when you peel a banana, all the peel comes off. Well, you can't do that on the Opera House because it will be in the sky. So we had to sort of peel it inwards, like a banana peeling inwards. If the thing was coming towards us, it's fine, but on the edge, we couldn't do that. So we had to think of another way. So this is kind of where we came to, and we decided to rig it instead. So we had much more control over every single tear. So, this one, there we go. So here's the actual geometry. Simple chrysalis, modeled by Mike Tossetto. And of course, there's 6 of these. The idea is that we just grab these polygons, rig these, have that peel off. Do the next one, have it peel off. Of course, nothing is ever quite as simple. Lots of little problems along the way. 3D is always like this. You have these great ideas of how quick and easy things are going to be. Never quite works out as easy as you think. So here, for example, we've got the tear. That's the bit that we want to tear off. Of course, we have shading problems. It's a separate piece. So with the Cinema 4D, we can drop them in a connect object, which welds all of those points together, and we can subdivide that, and we end up with still a nice smooth mesh, which is great because we can bring in lots of objects and weld them all together. So here is my piece, and whoop, there we go. Job done. Basically, that was the principle. Here's one I did earlier. So here's an early test. And you can see in this example, we've got like a whole bunch of bones and joints that are all kind of attached to the edges, snapped into their place. And they're bound to it with a skin object. So if we enable this, enable the connect, and let's just drag through and have a look. And you can see this is the kind of idea that we were going with. But there's a few problems. If I just enable these, so we get a bit of thickness and we get some subdivision. As we pull through, you can see that we kind of get this weird cracking that happens too fast. And that's pretty much just to do with not enough geometry. The polygon is huge. As soon as those points break apart, you get this massive tear. So we had to subdivide it a lot more to make it dense enough to get the tear more accurate. There's also problems with the alignments of the joints using this technique. They're all at different angles. Rotating them becomes a bit of a chore because you're rotating them on all 3. You're going to get gimbal lock and problems. So we needed to think of a nicer, simpler way of setting up these rigs. You can see the kind of thing that we were looking to do. You know, this is an early test that Mike did. And here we have a setup which is very similar to the kind of final solution that we had. So here we've got a spline, as you can see. So rather than using the edges, we decided to use a simple spline. And we can use a command in Cinema which allows you to convert splines to joints, which is particularly handy. You just come in here and you go spline to joints, and you've got your joint chain in place. And they're all perfectly aligned. They're all dead straight. It means all your rotations are going to be nice and easy to do. So that was one part of the setup. Now, let me just hide that spline. So there's all our joints in place. If we enable the skin, you can see that we're starting to get the result that we want. But we wanted to add in some secondary motion, so we thought we would do that with the jiggle deformer. And the jiggle deformer just allows you to add like inertia to any animation from deformers. So when it stops moving, it gives it a natural wobble, which is really nice. But of course, as it wobbles, all the points move apart, and then the connect object goes, I'm connected, no, I'm not, yes, I am, and then you get all these splits and holes appearing everywhere. So even these things that you think are going to be simple aren't. But the jiggle deformer is pretty cool because it allows you to restrict your deformation using vertex maps. So what we really needed to do was to animate a vertex map so that we could animate the joints unfolding and animate the vertex map coming down. And that's actually incredibly easy. So here we've got our vertex map, and you can see that it's just 100%. So it's going to affect everything. All of those points are going to get jiggled. Now, Cinema has a pose morph for morphing, and it allows you to morph geometry, of course, and hierarchies and cameras and all sorts of things, but also UV maps and vertex maps. So we wanted to use it with vertex maps. So I've got these poses set up, just one pose, and it really is as simple as here it is in its state, and there it is in the other state. So it's like all or nothing. Now, the pose morph is a tag, as you can see on the object here, but it also works with a deformer. So the advantage of using it with the deformer is you can then use fall off. So by adding that in, we now have fall off. And if we just enable that, and you can see there is our morph deformer. We can adjust the kind of fall off. And literally all we've got to do then is just animate this moving down as we unfurl it. And we know that the restriction of the deformation is only going to be where the vertex map is 100%. So it's actually surprisingly easy. So that's what we ended up doing. So if we just connect all these up, you can see this is the kind of result that we get. Still got a fair bit of popping going on. It's an early one. These parts here. But we did fix all of that. And there was a little bit of popping at the end, and then we just went in and spent hours in After Effects just rotoing it out. And every job always ends with a little bit of roto. So here is the final kind of rig. And you can see that we've got like a whole bunch of joints for each piece. There were 6 of these to do. So we ended up rigging about 40 joint chains and then end up with this kind of result like so. Which is pretty cool. So this is what it looks like. And the thing is, by using this technique rather than trying to use a simulation, is that we could use things like the jiggle deformer, use joints to art direct it. We also added in like turbulence modifiers, and we just animated those coming down. So as the joint ripped apart, then it would wobble the surface next to it, so it would feel like they were pulling apart, but actually they weren't really. It was just a big fake. But I guess a lot of this industry is all about smoke and mirrors. So as that happens, then a butterfly appears, which I'm not going to talk about, and then these parasites grow over the top of it. So the parasites, we ended up calling them jelly beans because it was a bit more friendly. This is the actual artwork from Ash. This is where we came to with it, and you can see that we've got like all different sizes. We've got like parasites growing on parasites. We've got this lovely subsurface scattering. But it's a little bit gory, almost, a bit fleshy. And there's going to be lots of people down at the Opera House, young and old, that want to watch this. So we needed to kind of happy it up a bit. So Ash was in Vancouver at the time. We were working in 16-bit half float with EXRs, so we rendered out a few frames, sent him a bunch of mats, and then he made a load of lookup tables for us. And the LUTs allowed us to bring them into After Effects, and then we could animate between them. So we created all of these different looks. And at first we were a bit, but actually they really grew on us. And when you see them in situ, they look great. And you can kind of see the sort of level of detail that we had going on here. So I thought what we would do is have a look at how we made the blobby bits in Cinema, which is here. Actually it's like a lot of things in 3D, I think, can be really daunting and complicated, but if you break them down into all the smaller components and just look at each little part. It's actually quite easy. And then when you add them all together, it looks complicated, but it's a journey. So this is simple. So what we started with was this simple just noise with a gradient to expose it. We just got some animated noise on the surface. And we can use that to modify our clones. So in here we have a few pieces of geometry, and these objects are simply set to clone on the surface. Simple as that. Pretty much MoGraph 101. If we add these in, you can see parasites. If we just give them a little bit of random scale and rotation, and then what we did was we used these noises that I just showed you, and they're set up in these materials, and they're just really simple in a layer shader with some noise that's animated, and then a gradient that's just added over the top to just wipe that on. We use these with shader effectors, and you can see in here, if we come to the shading tab, I'm actually using the V-Ray instant shader. We rendered this in V-Ray. Not all the shots we did in V-Ray, some we did in standard renderer. But the V-Ray instant shader is awesome because it allows you to instance your shaders anywhere you want. So I could set this up on my actual material so I could see it in place, and then I could use it within the effector as an instance, and I haven't got to keep worrying about updating many places. So if we enable these, you basically see the result. And as that noise grows, you can see that the parasites grow across. And the noise is animated as well, so you get a kind of organic feel as it grows across the sails of the opera house. There are a couple of issues, though. One of the things is like around the edges here. Looks great here, but when you put that onto the opera house, these are all going to get cut off, which is going to sort of ruin the illusion. You really want to feel like they're on the surface, not like, otherwise it's going to feel like they're projected. It's all these little things. So we did at first try just using a polygon selection and removing all these, but then you end up with a very hard edge. So I got out my Wacom and got down to some serious like artworking, and then came up with this, which you can see is it's one of my great pieces. But we can use this to modulate the scale of the clones. It's actually inverse, but we can make them tiny here and big here, and that's exactly what we did. So just with a shader effector, as you can see, I just bring that in there, and if we enable that, jump to the end, and now you can see that, yeah, so now it's just sort of fades them out around the edge. Feels just a little bit more natural, a bit more comfortable. So that's pretty simple. They're the little ones. They're filling in all the holes. And then we had the big parasites, the scary ones. Again, really simple geometry, nothing too complex. We just needed to make sure that this part was always stuck to the surface. So what we wanted to do was have it so they appeared like they were growing, and we decided to do that using morphs. So I've got this set up here with some morph targets. Pretty basic. As you can see, we're just manipulating those points. Just grab the magnet tool, pull them down, smooth it out, pull them down a bit more, and create another morph target each time. And that gave us a whole different states that we could use. And here we have this, and it's animated. So as we drag through, you can see it sort of grows. It's not looking that convincing yet, but it's on its way. If we just hide those edges, and we've added in some displacement on here. So the displacement is just done with noise, just some animated noise, just so it feels alive all the time. I actually sped this one up a little bit because they grow kind of slow and lethargic on the actual opera house, but this one I wanted to speed it up just to emphasize the result. But you can see what's going on there. It's kind of working quite well. Also added in a jiggle deformer, and that just gives it that secondary motion. So as it moves from the morph and the displacement, you get that kind of secondary wobble, and it's starting to feel reasonably organic. Once you get the shaders on there, it's going to look pretty good. The other thing with this as well is that we use vertex maps, and you can see we're just using a vertex map with both deformers, just so that the base doesn't really wobble around. It doesn't displace, only at the top here. We wanted this bit to feel like it was stuck on the surface of the opera house. So that was pretty much how we created all of these weird globby things. And it's strange, like Ash's vision, you know, with these parasites, like, what is it? How are we going to do that? And here's an example of some of them as they form. I particularly like these kind of weird ones coming out of the bottom here. I'm not sure why. But they kind of like the jiggle and the morphs really make them feel like they're kind of growing and unfolding, and they do a bit look like intestines though, don't they? So yeah, that was how we did the big ones. Next we had the medium-sized parasites. So again, this is pretty much like MoGraph 101. So we've got these cloners here with a whole bunch of shapes in them, and we've set this to randomly pick them. And really, we're just cloning onto these polygon selections. So just make a selection and drag that in the cloner. That's where your parasites are going to be. Really wanted a better way of doing this. We wanted to be able to art direct these. We wanted to keep the procedural nature of working with MoGraph so that we could use all the effectors, but wanted to be able to place these by hand. Wanted to put each one where we wanted. And it's an unusual arbitrary surface because it's curving in different directions, so it's quite difficult to make sure that they stick to that thing. So you could just clone straight onto the surface, but then you have a lot of control. You don't have a lot of control over how you design it. So I came up with a little solution for that, which is pretty simple, really, but it really works well. And you can use this for any time you need to clone objects across a surface. Maybe it's trees for a forest, or rocks, or anything where you have lots of objects on a surface. So we're basically using single polygon objects. And you can see each of these white squares is a single polygon. And then what I've done is added in a constraint tag to each one. And this constraint tag allows us to do a whole bunch of things. But in this example, what we're doing is we're using the constraint tag in the clamp option. We've got two options that are important here. We're going to clamp to a surface. This is the surface, and we're going to align the z-axis to the normals. So what that means is each polygon is stuck to the surface, really. So now if I drag this around, you can see that it stays on the surface. It always aligns. Everything's cool. Works really well. If we then take all of those polygons and we put them in a connect object, it becomes one object. It connects them all together. So then we can take that connect and we can put that in a cloner, like this one, and it means that we can clone onto that surface. So you still have all the power of MoGraph, all of the things you want to do, but you can actually literally paint with these things. So if I just enable that and unhide it, you can see there now we have all of those clones. And we're just cloning onto the polygon center, which means that each polygon is going to get one clone. And what that basically means is if I come into my connect object, come down here, I can grab one of these polygons and I can just control drag to dupe it, and I can move it around, and now I've got another one here. In fact, it's actually easier than that. You can just hold down control, and then you can just drag. And as you do it, it creates a new polygon, which creates a new clone that's clamped to the surface. You can move it wherever you want. You just drag it around, and as you do it, you can just literally paint with these things. You've got full artistic control over where you want them to be, but at the same time, it's going to work with all of your MoGraph setup. So even as I sit here waffling on, you can see I'm like literally almost done the whole job already, and that's pretty much how long it took, about 10 minutes. So yeah, that's a really handy little way of using the connect with MoGraph. And you can see if I enable these effectors here, it just works with everything that's already set up. And you can see they've got a little bit of animated noise on them, so everything stays alive. So once again, it's like the combination of layering all of these different parts together to make like the bigger piece at the end. The final thing that we did with the parasites was just cloning onto each other. So here we have like the big wobbly blobby, and we have a polygon selection on there, and we have this cloner set to clone into that selection. We've got a couple of effectors here. And that just meant that as this grows, they kind of grow with it. And the nice thing here is that the MoGraph is working with all of the jiggle, all of the displacement, and you can see those clones are kind of moving around with the surface. And the other thing that we did as well was to clone onto that big blobby with a load of smaller ones. So if I just switch this on, you can see that as it grows, we then get a whole bunch of other particles or blobby things that grow across the surface of it. And you can see here that we've got a random effector at the bottom, which is just randomizing the color of these. And this is one of the great things about using a V-Ray for Cinema 4D. And honestly, it's a rock-solid render. It doesn't get enough press for how good it is. But but like you can so rely on it. It's awesome. So here I'm using the V-Ray Fast SSS material, and you can see I've got some V-Ray noise and V-Ray shaders. But if we open these up, not that one, in fact. Which one is it? This one? This one? One of them. Yeah, so you can see we've got the, that's the V-Ray displaced material, actually. But it works with all the MoGraph color shaders, which is really good. So in here you can see I'm using like the Cinema 4D native colorizer to colorize all of those clones. In here I'm using the MoGraph color shader, but I've got that in a V-Ray material, in a V-Ray shader. So I've got V-Ray shaders and Cinema shaders all mix and match, and they're all working together, which is like credit to the V-Ray guys for getting that to work, really, because it means you can get V-Ray, and then you can open all your Cinema scenes, and they'll render. And then you can gradually learn the material system and all of the shaders that come with it, but you can still use all your Cinema ones that you're used to and happy with. And that to me is like a bonus. The other cool thing about this is that what I wanted to do was use render instances. Not really many on here. In this example, there aren't many objects, but where there are like hundreds and hundreds or thousands of them, really need render instances. But you can't use render instances with subdivision surfaces unless you actually clone the subdivision surface itself. But we wanted to keep the polygon count really low. And there's a little hack that you can do to get around that, and that is, with V-Ray, it's simple, but this works with Cinema as well. So with the displaced material, you've got this option, use as subsurface. Easy. And what it does is it then does the subdivision at render time. So we've got, in the parameters, you can see my displacement amount is 0.001. So you don't actually see any displacement, you're just using it as a subdivision surface. It means you can use render instances and then subdivide at render time. You can do exactly the same thing in Cinema with the subpoly displacement. Just put a 50% gray in there and 0.01 as your displacement, and it works the same. It's a really cool trick. So that was the blobbies. And there they are on the side of the Opera House, jelly beans. So here's a little shot of the butterfly as it forms into the parasites. Once the parasites have formed, you get these huge kind of shells that form over the top of it, and they're pulled by these muscles. And we must have gone through about 20 different ways of rigging these. We tried so many ways of doing it. Once the shells have formed, they crack open. Here's another shot. And there's a shot of it on the Opera House. And to me, this is like one of the most successful shots. You know, it's amazing to be there and see that. Totally transform that building into these kind of huge, gigantic, kind of prehistoric shell shapes. And then what happens, because Ash is so bonkers, is like the whole thing cracks open, and then there's this octopus in there laying chrome eggs. You know, I don't know where he thinks this stuff from. But I thought it'd be good to have a look at how we did the cracking. So yeah, we're going to do that. It's kind of like you think that maybe what you do is just grab the Voronoi fracture and then whack that on there, and then everything's done. It's like everything. You think these things are going to work really quickly, but it never kind of works out that easily. So here I've got like the middle shell, just as an example of how we might do it. Here's a Voronoi fracture, which is a great tool, don't get me wrong. But it's got that classic Voronoi shape, you know? The Voronoi fracture allows you to take sources and you can drop them in here. You can drop in like splines, particles, matrices, anything really, and it will use them as a source for where the Voronoi shapes are going to occur. You know, we can increase the amount of pieces on here. You can change the type of distribution. But really, I didn't really think it was going to cut it. You know, it just doesn't look like it's cracking open. So we thought, okay, we'll just go the long way and we'll design all the cracks ourselves. So that's what we did. I think every shot here we're thinking, oh, we'll just do it this way. And then we're like, no, we won't. We'll do it the really long way. And we decided to do it with Booleans. So here we've got an invisible shell. There it is. So I've got the shell here. I've got a cube. I've got some displacement on there. And I've got a Boolean. So if I drop my shell in there, you can see that we now get that crack and get the piece missing. But the cool thing about this is you can grab this cube and you can like rotate it around. You can move it where you want to kind of make that crack where you want. You can change the size of it. We've got this displacer on here. Maybe you want to just like reduce the jagged edge so it's a bit smoother, or maybe make it more jagged. So you really can art direct like the cracking. And if you've smashed a window, you know that sometimes when you smash it, it looks nicer than other times. Sometimes you smash a window and it looks horrible, so you have to smash another one to make sure it looks nice. And it's the same with this. So once you've done one, you can just control drag to dupe it, and I'll just make another one, always make another one, back up. We hide that. That's just so we can keep going with the cracking. And then what you do is you set the first one to subtract, and then you just set the next one to intersect. And because you're using exactly the same setup for both, you get this seamless result. And like you can't see it. I mean, you probably switch to that at the point where you want to crack it anyway, and you leave the perfect one there until that point. But now you've got this thing here. So then we can take these booleans and we just press C to make them editable. And then we've got our geometry. And then I've got my piece. So that's pretty much how we did it. So here it is, and when you come to it, this is the kind of thing that you end up with. And one of the main reasons that we did it this way as well is because if you're using the Voronoi fracture, and these edges here are the dangerous ones, it's pretty hard to get it to not explode outwards. How do you make a thing crack inwards? And like when you take this on, you kind of don't think about these things. You think, oh, that's all right, we have to do it this way. And then you have to make them all cracking inwards. It feels a bit odd. This is why I've done it on the middle one. So we animated these all different ways. Here we've got one that's got a dynamics tag on it. If we enable that, you can see that it's just drops down. Pretty exciting. But the cool thing with dynamics is that you can use forces with it, like wind and attractors and stuff, so you can guide it where you want. You can even animate it and use the force follow position, etc., to sort of try and make it go where you want. But for this, we just needed them to kind of burst off in an interesting way. So we use the custom initial velocity, and this allows you to, when the dynamics is triggered, you can set these various velocities for rotation and position. So we've got it on X and then some rotation, so it just fires it out. You could kind of approach this whole piece and just put dynamics on it and try and do the whole thing, but it's a bit like the chrysalis. You're better off to try and art direct each piece. You can get each crack to go exactly where you want it to go. So that's what we did. So if we press play now, you can see that that piece sort of flies off, like so. If you're not happy with it, you can come back in here. You can tweak these. You can tweak those parameters. But I'm really happy with that one. I'm not going to tweak anything. Never tweak in a demo. Unless you're brave. So there I've baked that one, you see. So now I've baked that out. I've got like, boom, it's done. That piece is done. Now we just move on to the next one. So it is a bit of a long-winded process, but this is where you can bring in things like Voronoi fracture. So here we've got the Voronoi fracture, and if we just make that so you can see it. So you can see now where I've Booleaned all my cracks out. This one, maybe I want this to be in smaller pieces. Rather than it be distributed like that as well, maybe what we do is just come down and change that distribution. So it's like exponential, kind of like so. So maybe at this edge, as this piece, these are smaller, and then these are a bit bigger. And then again, we use dynamics for this. And if we enable the dynamics, enable the initial velocity, same trick as before. As this bigger piece comes off, this one's going to break apart as well, and it's going to feel like they're interacting. They're not really interacting, but it means that we can control every single piece. We can control every explosion. So now you can see we get this kind of result. And it's just a matter of building up these one by one until you're happy with it. We've got one pink one that's sort of flying out there. Because we're using the Voronoi fracture, we could actually do a MoGraph selection of this one piece. And then we could like have it scale down as it comes out. Or we could put a force on it so that one is a bit heavier or something. So you can control every single piece. So, you've got like that much control down to individual particles almost, or you can work on the whole thing. So that was pretty much how we built the shell cracking. Here's an example of that. And a couple of other things that we did. We used some of the other shells as collision objects. Because we're baking them all out, if I just show you this, you can see that some of them are done with Voronoi, some of them are using dynamics. Some of them we just animated with keyframes. It's just easier. So you can see there we've got a whole bunch of keyframes for some animation on some of them. And you kind of end up with this sort of result. I think it starts around here. It's exciting. There you go. So yeah, so you can see that they're interacting with each other as well, which really helps sell the effect. And yeah, that was how we did the shell cracking. So I'm getting low on time. But what I wanted to do was just come back here. And I wanted to just show you like just a short section of some of the artwork as it was projected. Now the thing is this is 15 minutes long, and I've only got about 5 minutes left. So I've just done a load of time remapping on it to get it down to 2 minutes. Yeah, that wasn't actually, thank you. There was a bit of flickering and stuff, and all the textures were done. That wasn't the final, but it was very near the end. Yeah, and there's a picture of me and Mike with the Opera House in the background, because you can actually climb Sydney Harbour Bridge, so we decided that would be a good night to do it. And that was Mike Torsetto from Never Sit Still. It was basically me and Mike did most of this. So I hope you enjoyed it. Tomorrow I will be back with another presentation about a different project. And that's it. If anyone's got any questions, fire away. Thanks for coming.